Hello, welcome to today's webinar, which is What's Next Now? Electrolytic Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Markets. My name is Todd Jones, and I am Head of Policy at Center for Resource Solutions. I'm delighted to be the moderator of today's discussion. For those of you not familiar with Center for Resource Solutions, or CRS, we are a nonprofit organization that creates policy and market solutions to advance sustainable energy. Our work spans certification, policy and market development, and education. We run the Green E certification programs, including Green E Energy, the leading independent third-party certification program for voluntary renewable energy in North America. We engage with regulators and policymakers on renewable energy and greenhouse gas policy design. And through initiatives like the Clean Energy Accounting Project and the Clean Energy Tracking Collaborative, we work to address complex questions around clean energy accounting and tracking that can create barriers to investment and market participation. We also convene the Renewable Energy Markets, or REM, conference series, the next installment of which will be held in Washington, D.C. next month. And we support research and education to strengthen voluntary markets. This webinar is a part of our REM Next webinar series, where we continue conversations that began at the last REM conference and look ahead to issues that will shape discussions at the next one. So today's webinar builds on a panel from REM in 2025 in Houston, Texas, called What's Next for Hydrogen? Expected hydrogen market changes resulting from the final 45V guidance. I'm delighted to be joined today by an exceptional panel of speakers representing different parts of the renewable hydrogen ecosystem. Together, they bring a range of perspectives from organizations helping shape the market and experiencing really firsthand the opportunities and the challenges facing the industry today. So Janice Lin is the founder, president, and interim executive director of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating the deployment of renewable hydrogen by advancing policies and projects that build both supply and demand. With more than 20 years of experience in clean energy market development, Janice has really been a leader in shaping markets for energy storage and grid modernization, and now renewable hydrogen. Chris Shugart is vice president of development at Electric Hydrogen, a leading U.S. manufacturer of industrial scale electrolyzer systems for clean hydrogen production. He leads the development of renewable hydrogen projects and brings more than 25 years of experience developing energy infrastructure, including hydrogen, renewable energy, battery storage, transmission. And before joining Electric Hydrogen, Chris held senior leadership positions at Pattern Energy and Rev Renewables, where he helped develop and deliver large-scale renewable energy projects. And last but not least is Don Boyajian. He's director of government affairs and counsel at Plug Power, which is a leading U.S. clean hydrogen company that develops electrolyzers, hydrogen production facilities, fueling infrastructure, and fuel cell technologies. Over the past 5 years, Don has represented Plug Power on legislative and regulatory issues at the federal and state levels, including the development and implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act's clean hydrogen incentives. And prior to joining Plug, he served in legal and policy roles with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York State Senate. So I want to thank all of them and welcome them all. I'm going to start today by just providing a little bit of background just to set the stage, and then we'll jump into the discussion. I've prepared some questions for our panelists, but we can really go where the conversation leads us and dive deeper into a particular topic if we want. There's a lot to potentially talk about, from the future outlook for renewable-powered electrolytic hydrogen and policies that may shape its growth, to the role of renewable energy markets and accounting frameworks in that growth. And like many of you, I'm still learning about this rapidly developing space, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists and hearing their perspectives and learning right alongside you. We'll leave some time at the end for your questions, for audience questions, so please submit your questions for Janice and Chris and Dawn in the Q&A box as they come to you, and we'll do our best to get to as many as time allows. So by way of introduction, uh, you know, in the years following the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, many in the renewable energy and hydrogen industries, I think, anticipated that Section 45V clean hydrogen production tax credit would drive rapid growth in renewable powered electrolytic hydrogen production in the United States. I think expectations centered on large scale electrolyzer development, major new demand for renewable electricity and RECs, and the emergence of hydrogen as a transformative new clean energy market. These were some of the issues that we explored at REM in 2025. Since then, market expectations and policy dynamics have changed. Today, I think the outlook is more nuanced. While the 45V tax credit remains an important market signal, changing economic conditions, uncertainty around end-use demand, shifting federal priorities, and reduced momentum behind the hydrogen hub development have tempered near-term expectations. At the same time, significant interest remains in electrolytic hydrogen as a potentially important long-term source of demand for renewable electricity, particularly in industrial sectors seeking pathways to deep decarbonization. So what's next now? Hence the title of our webinar. Today, we're going to examine the evolving outlook for renewable energy powered electrolytic hydrogen in the United States. We'll explore where future hydrogen demand is expected to emerge and the scale of production that may realistically develop over the next decade, and which regions, industries, market structures are most likely to drive growth. Um, and the discussion will also consider the extent to which future demand for renewable hydrogen is likely to be voluntary or incentive driven or compliance based. What new state and federal or international policy drivers could support renewable powered hydrogen markets? Which sectors may face regulatory or customer pressure to adopt low carbon hydrogen or hydrogen derived fuels? And how important will renewable electricity sourcing requirements become in different hydrogen products in the marketplace? So we'll revisit, the implementation of the 45V tax credit and its broader implications for clean energy, accounting and procurement. You'll recall Treasury's adopted framework, included incrementality and temporal matching and deliverability requirements, along with the use of RECs and EACs to demonstrate renewable electricity use. That represented one of the most detailed, policy efforts to define standards for renewable powered hydrogen production. So I'm going to ask our panelists to share their perspectives on that from their positions in the market and discuss whether these concepts are likely to shape industry practice more broadly and influence hydrogen policies and clean fuels programs, or become foundational frameworks for demonstrating credible renewable electricity use in hydrogen production more broadly. So with that, by way of introduction, I'll start with a question, for you all. Let's go back a year or so. How were you feeling about the market then, and why? And how are you feeling about it now? How would you describe where the market stands? And has the outlook fundamentally changed, or has it simply become more realistic? And I'm happy to start with whoever wants to jump in first.
All right. I guess I was first to the button. I'll go.
Go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
So first of all, Todd, thanks for having us here. Yeah, it is interesting to think back over the last 12 to 18 months. I guess it was right about a year ago that the OBBA got passed, but in the months leading up to that, the first half of last year, I think it was a scary time for all of us politically. We were unsure where the new Trump administration was going to go with things. I think we were all watching Congress like a sporting event with a couple of innings of where it was going to land, and there were some scary moments there on what was going to be the direction of policy in the United States. But I know we are quite happy with where hydrogen landed. We were able to preserve the 45V, with the characteristics that were important to us. So we were happy about that. The other two other notes I'll make. It is for sure gone slower than any of us would like, but we've seen some projects get to FID, some projects get built. I know in our case, the picture behind me, we successfully progressed and completed construction of our first utility scale green hydrogen project in Texas. The other interesting observation, which I think is generally a healthy one, I think a year and a half ago, virtually every electric company and every oil and gas company had a hydrogen development arm, and so it was a very crowded space for the scope of the market. I think we've seen most of those turn to other product lines, particularly power and data centers. So it's left the hydrogen purist among us in a less crowded field. I would think it's a good thing in letting us get focused in on the customers that are moving ahead. So
Thanks, Chris.
I
Janice or
can,
Don?
I'm happy to speak next. Between a year ago and today, I would say the sentiment is largely the same for Plug. And we own the largest electrolytic hydrogen facility that's operating in the country, 15 tons a day in Georgia. So when one big beautiful bill passed, it was a relief, kind of lived to fight another day. It wasn't really impactful to our plant that was already operational. But, it was kind of, it squeaked through, and that was a good outcome at the time in the overall universe of what was happening. Um, but I think there's the more fundamental question of, is this policy working? Is an extension of a policy that's proven to kind of fall short in achieving its intended goals? Uh, is that can't be the end game. We need to have some fundamental changes to the underlying policy to make it achieve what everybody sought out to do, which was scale the hydrogen economy. So it was kind of a live to fight another day. Our existing operational plants are okay. Um, and it's the kind of the same sentiment now. And now, as the end of 2027, when the next sunset comes up, there's kind of a discussion happening in the industry. Is it an extension that we need to advocate for? Do we need to have substantive changes to the policy, to the statute, to the regulations? It's maybe to the GREET model. There's all sorts of discussions that have to happen because fundamentally, the framework that was finalized has not proven to be effective. I think, as far as I know, we're the only company to claim the PTC as a taxpayer. I don't know of anybody else that has. Um, and it's not just impactful for our hydrogen generation business. It's also impactful as a manufacturer of electrolyzers. The only place we're seeing product really move in our electrolyzer business with consistency is in Europe, not in the United States. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
Janice.
Thanks, Todd. And I really appreciate the comments of Chris and Don. To this question, I would say briefly, it's substantially cooled, but there's progress. And, sadly, I think from a year ago, the impetus and the need to work on this has never been greater. I mean, like just the extreme heat waves, the wildfires that are consuming the planet, right? This is not just a forest wildfire issue anymore. The war in the Middle East, making energy and fossil fuel price volatility unbearable and unaffordable. I mean, those underlying factors are, I think, a reminder to us all that we need to put our heads down and really think about how to accelerate alternative pathways, right? We need diversity in fuels. We need to leverage all of our resources like never before, work together like never before. So despite the headwinds and I agree with Don, the framework, um, it makes electrolytic hydrogen more challenging economically. But, I'm always the glass is half full, and we do have projects that have safe harbored. The incentives are moving forward. And we know, especially because of these other global trends I'm talking about, the need for this has never been greater. And I'll pause there.
That's great. Yeah. So, I, so we've talked a little bit about sort of where we were and where we are. I want to talk about market outlook now. I mean, Chris, maybe starting with you from your perspective, a company developing, large scale electrolytic hydrogen projects, where do you see the greatest opportunities, maybe over the next 5 to 10 years? Which sectors or regions or customer types, do you think will ultimately drive demand?
Yep. What I would say, I think, hydrogen started out with, hydrogen can do anything, and technically that's true. It can solve a wide range of problems, but I think, and I'm one that probably the past 4 years has probably tried just about everything in every sector, but I think the industry's really been able to distill down where is the lowest hanging fruit, where are the ones that have the best chance of moving ahead and focusing efforts there. I'd agree with Don from our perspective as an OEM serving customers, serving Europe-located projects that are serving European demand has definitely been what is moving the fastest in this industry. Particularly, they've got a ramping up mandate for road transportation, which is causing refineries to look really hard at decarbonizing their hydrogen as a low-hanging fruit for the broader road transport sector. When you look at the United States, that's where I'm focused personally, is developing projects in the U.S. I think even there, pretty much everything we're working on, and I would say most of what our customers are working on is U.S. sited projects that take advantage of the 45V incentives, which are still, globally, I think the best incentive you're going to find in the world, but making products that you can move to Europe and other markets that do have the supporting policy framework. And within those are probably seeing the most of aviation and shipping related projects where, particularly aviation, they don't have a lot of other good alternatives. It's difficult to electrify an airplane. So things like sustainable aviation fuel, which the project, my background is going to be a SAF plant for one of our customers, or e-methanol for shipping. Those have probably been our two biggest focuses, and then maybe ammonia right after that. But it's all large scale U.S. incentives, but making a liquid product that you can ship overseas.
Got it. And Don and Janice, what's your perspective on that? Are there other markets or applications you're thinking about? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to jump in and build on what Chris said,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that demand that he mentioned for sustainable aviation fuel and methanol for shipping and ammonia as a shipping fuel too. These planes and boats are not swimming or flying or sailing just in domestic waters in Europe. They have to come to North America, and we, here in this country would be wise to pay attention to these trends because, literally that ship has sailed. There are ammonia fueled ships, there are methanol fueled ships. And if we don't produce these fuels at our ports of call, our ports will become uncompetitive. I mean, quite literally. So we, the GHC, remain very bullish and hopeful about demand and the ability to produce, the need and the demand and the ability to produce these fuels domestically. However, you need something to get started because it's, it's one thing to go from zero to, here's a new ammonia facility here in Central California. And so we've been working for the last 5 years and looking at the power sector. And, everyone talks about AI as the power demand, but there are so many, ironically, I think data centers are now, because there's so much grid constraint, requiring microgrids, really big microgrids. So how do you power those microgrids? Just this morning, we had a webinar talking about the Calistoga Resiliency Center, which is a hydrogen-fueled microgrid that powers the entire city of Calistoga during multi-day public safety power shutoffs. And that's a liquid hydrogen-fueled microgrid with fuel cells and batteries. Really exciting, and it's commercial. No incentives, no grants. state level grants. It's a commercial project. I'm also bullish about the power sector because there is a policy context in the power sector in certain areas, especially local areas like City of Los Angeles, that requires 100% clean energy by date certain. That is really hard to do without clean, firm, dispatchable power. And with a bill that we just got signed into law, SB 1350, now enables renewable hydrogen to be used in gas turbines. So we have this interesting ability now to use renewable hydrogen in an existing asset that has all the interconnection. And it may, in some cases, be the only way to achieve these power sector mandates. So both at the microgrid level and also at the grid scale level, I think that's an exciting application for green hydrogen because even a small blend into one gas turbine represents quite a significant off-taker.
Yeah, so I want to get to Don's perspective on this market outlook question as well, but just sticking with SB 1350 for a moment, Janice, is the power sector sort of a transition strategy or source of demand, or are you thinking about it more in terms of as sort of a long-term a long-term sort of strategy or source of demand for the industry? I mean, again, you mentioned that this is an example of a potentially important policy that could scale demand for renewable hydrogen, and recognizes renewable hydrogen fueled turbines within the RPS. So, how significant is that? And I'm really thinking about, if you're using renewable electricity to produce hydrogen to produce electricity for the RPS rather than just using that original renewable electricity itself for the RPS, so hydrogen is sort of storage. Is what is the real potential for that, and how and how sort of big is that RPS incentive for driving renewable hydrogen specifically?
Yeah, so we think of it as super important as a near-term catalyst
Okay.
to supporting large projects like the one that Dan talked about, a 15-ton per day project. I mean, we'd like to see a lot of projects like that. That's a lot of hydrogen, and it may be more hydrogen than you have in available trucks and buses and fueling stations today. One power plant could easily, a sizable one, blend in that amount of hydrogen. So it's a way to get started. And when I talk about getting started, the goal is to have sufficient demand so you can build bigger production sources at scale, drive down the cost, and importantly, start to think about the shared transport, pipeline transport infrastructure to deliver it at very low cost. I mean, that's why fossil fuels are so successful, right? Because they have so much infrastructure that's been built up over many, like more than 100 years. And when we talk about a clean hydrogen economy, we have that infrastructure, but only in concentrated pockets, like where there are oil refineries. We need to expand that infrastructure to many other sectors. So in the long term, your question about will hydrogen have a really big role in the power sector, if you look to other countries, renewable hydrogen or clean hydrogen in the power sector is definitely part of Germany's power sector plan. How much the existing combustion turbines will be run is going to be a function of what other resources are there. If you have a lot of other resources, probably not very much. They'll just be run like, really ultra long duration storage assets that are called upon when needed. But the answer to your other question is really kind of a function of a broader grid planning question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That helps a lot. Don, what's your perspective on, or I don't know, reactions to what Janice and Chris have said, or your perspective on sort of the general market outlook and where demand is probably coming from, short term and long term?
I agree with everything that I heard Chris and Janice say, and I'll just echo the sentiments about hydrogen's role as a storage medium, long duration storage. That role that it can play in grid smoothing. Policy needs to do a better job of supporting that. In terms of the market and offtake, Plug has a very unique perspective because we provide our own offtake. Because our business is propped up as a fuel cell company. We developed the first commercially viable fuel cell product. It's a fuel cell that's used in fork trucks at material handling centers like Amazon, Walmart, Home Depot. About 80,000 fuel cells out operating in the field. So we are our own offtake. Essentially, that has been that's a game changer for us, because if you look at the glut of nascent budding hydrogen projects that came to be 4 or 5 years ago, the thing that was the death knell for a lot of them was the inability to find offtake, to procure offtake, right? Having an offtaker is key to financing these projects. So policy needs to incentivize offtake as much, if not more, than just hydrogen generation. It needs to be kind of a holistic suite of policies to make the hydrogen generation projects financeable. I think that's one area that things have fallen short. And speaking of the one big beautiful bill, the policy that we've relied on for our fuel cell business was extended into the 2030s through a one big beautiful bill. It's the old, well, now it's in Section 48, but it's the investment tax credit, and that covers hydrogen fuel cells. So that's having that policy is what propped up that business for us. It's what drives that business for us. So we need those types of incentives to drive offtake in other areas. So, but everything Janice and Chris said, I agree with.
That's great. Thanks, Don. Okay. I mean, we've already brought in sort of a global perspective to this conversation, and Chris, you mentioned specifically looking, beyond the U.S. Don, to Europe. I guess just diving a bit deeper, how has that outlook for renewable hydrogen internationally? How is how has the or what impacts do developments overseas have on investment and project development here in the U.S.? I guess so. We can start with Dawn or Chris or wherever you'd like.
Well, I hope this is answering the question. Maybe it isn't, but and Chris alluded to this. A lot of our electrolyzer business is focused on Europe right now because the policies are more supportive of it. I also would like to note that there is a bit of a couple things. When we look at the policies in Europe and why they're more supportive, number one, they have a balance of carrots and sticks, which I think is absent in the United States. The United States traditionally leans on in just the carrot side of the policy equation. So having both sides of that equation, I think, is more potent. I think I lost my train of thought here on the second piece that I was going to say. It'll come back to me. I'll let somebody else come back to me.
Thanks,
on
Don.
that.
Do you
Yeah.
mean sticks in terms of emissions regulations for different sectors? Or is
Yeah,
that...
yeah. I mean, there's not just like incentives to provide a carrot. Hey, if you make clean hydrogen, you get
Yeah.
this much per kilogram. There are things that mandate you to do certain things,
Yeah.
not just incentivize you to do a good thing. And that's across the board with climate and energy policy in Europe. That you see that across the board, and that's not as prominent in the United States. Another thing with respect to the three pillars type framework. This came back to me now. I remembered the policies in the EU. They've dialed some of those three pillars policies back, or there's a lot of talk about tempering them because they've proven to be so impractical. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
we're gonna dive into that next. But yeah, we'll definitely
I'll
talk
stop
about.
on that. And then the other thing we're seeing, I'll leave it at that.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Janice or Chris?
Yeah, I'll dive on, Don, and this will be probably familiar to a lot of your webcast audience here. If you rewind to the early days of wind and solar, we had the generous incentives, but that alone didn't cause wind and solar to proliferate everywhere. It concentrated on states like California that in addition to the incentives, had, as Don said, the stick, where there's a mandate that load serving entities had to have to source a certain amount of it from renewables or face pretty steep penalties. So that's what creates action. You kind of need both of those things, and the U.S. only has the first half of that for hydrogen. There have been some state level discussions, I think, of some mandates, but nothing with the kind of weight of like the original electric RPSs that we saw back in the 2000s. But Europe has done that. Europe has put binding mandates, both the EU and the UK, sector specific mandates with real teeth, real financial penalties if you fail to comply. And I agree with this may be for a future question in the panel here too. People have to believe those penalties are going to come to fruition and not be watered down or pushed out to actually create action. So we see some of that still of, do people believe those are going to stay as they are, or are they going to get watered down and pushed out? But in general, I think that is the main reason we're seeing Europe. It is and there are some other places on the globe, but that's the most notable one that has both U.S. production incentives to make this a competitive supply location, and Europe sector specific mandates that incent buyers to act with some haste.
Got it. Janice, did you have anything to add to that?
I'm big fan of carrots and sticks. The other thing, the other reason that mandates are so effective, because it provides a durable market signal of where you want to go, right? Like, you're here today and something may be nascent and small, but it puts a stake in the ground that allows the ecosystem to develop in stride. Because achieving, like, look at what we accomplished with solar energy, look what we accomplished with energy storage. Like, honestly, even the whole storage market was started with the idea of setting a mandate. So there's so much that needs to happen in building a new ecosystem. Multiple stakeholders and agencies and departments need to get aligned. So it's super duper helpful. Yeah, that's what was coming to mind. And we don't have that quite yet. But we do have eligibility for one existing mandate, which is a step in the right direction.
That's great. Okay, so let's get to 45V and the three pillars. So Don, you've said that sort of the implementation of 45V, particularly the three pillars, ended up, being I don't know, a disappointment for the industry, or what? So what do you think policymakers got wrong, and what are the biggest sort of consequences for project development?
Yeah, I'm biased because Plug's been involved with the formulation of this policy since the very beginning. We were helped write those words. There was no notion, no existence, no contemplation of three pillars, anything. If there had been, we would have needed a lot more per kilogram to make the incentive meaningful. We've been able to comply for our projects that are built, but I'll tell you, just from half of my job is as a lawyer, and half of it is on the kind of this policy side. And on my lawyering half, I'm cleaning up projects that didn't get built for a lot of my job. And the ones that didn't get built, it's driven because we had Plug was ambitious, and we started building things before the dust had settled on some of this. A project that was relying on hydroelectric, incrementality, didn't see that one coming. Right? Like, there's real consequences to this. There's real exposure. There's real lost opportunities. There's real lost job, opportunities for job creation and tax revenue for localities and decarbonization and just demonstrating viability of this market. So that's been a real disappointment. I think the most problematic. Well, there is a cliff looming with hourly matching, that kind of is going to come in, and that is a requirement that's pertains to one incentive for one niche industry, and that is not enough to create a market for hourly EACs. That one niche policy. So that's a problem, potentially. The incrementality piece, I'd say, is the least congruent with the plain words of the statute. So I would say it's had a tremendous, obviously, this is stating the obvious, it's had a tremendous chilling effect on these projects getting built. We've done a lot of analysis in terms of what it does to the economics of the incentive, and it affects, erodes up to $2 per kilogram of the incentive, and the margin on these projects is already brutally challenging. Geographically, I think in total, what the three pillars did is very much limit where projects can and cannot be, at all economically viable. I'd love to see some walking away from the incrementality concept, because I think there's a lot of clean energy resources that should be utilized, and would have, if we could get hydroelectric and nuclear on the table, I think that would be a huge benefit to making the policy have some more efficacy.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Chris, do you see it the same way? Are there, are there benefits from the framework that have become, more apparent over time?
Yeah, mostly, maybe slightly different. I do think the three pillars, as it was published, does represent a an honest measure of the decarbonization we're accomplishing. That was kind of how it was set apart, and it was a bit of a compromise between the environmental lobby, renewable energy, and even the oil and gas sector. I couldn't agree with Don more that it is. I don't think we appreciated fully at the time how difficult it was to meet those hurdles at all, or at what cost, and that has delayed things. So, I think we are tending to see that those same three pillars adopted in most of the places that we see frameworks adopted, but my hope is that places will be more thoughtful about. I think we probably think that is still the right end state if decarbonization is truly our end goal as an industry, but more thoughtful ramp ins and grandfathering and things like that have some compromise between immediate decarbonization or building up the industry that will eventually have decarbonization. And by the way, one thing that in hindsight I'm pretty glad that happened is that 45V was formulated in a way that the traditional oil and gas sectors were supportive of it. I think that's been important to the longevity of it. If it was viewed as purely a green renewable thing, we may not have fared as well in the last legislature, right? So I think continuing to plot paths that cast a pretty broad net of types of projects and things, there's some benefit to that.
Okay. And Janice, I think California's SB 1350 includes an hourly matching requirement for renewable,
Yes.
Electrolytic hydrogen. So, so what's your perspective on at least that pillar? And then does that suggest that concepts like hourly matching are becoming sort of more part of the long-term definition of renewable hydrogen, regardless of what sort of happens to 45V?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I will address that, but I wanted to respond to something that Chris said.
Sure.
And especially as the representative from the green hydrogen coalition, I completely agree that we need an all of the above strategy. And I can't say that more emphatically, because we need to build the shared infrastructure. Remember those pesky pipelines I talked about? That's really hard to do on a pure green product, simply because we just don't have a lot of it quite yet. And I also agree with both Don and Chris that the requirements have certainly made it more difficult to develop these projects, for sure. And we saw that in the beginning. And it's not that we're against these guardrails, right? Like we need to have I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? We need environmental guardrails. And I understand the concern and maybe the fears that existed a few years ago when we first started talking about this. However, it's if you put the guardrails in too early on an immature market, the net result is you stay with fossil fuels, right? You stymie its development. And the thing that I think about, like, because I grew up in the solar industry, what if we weren't allowed to use renewable energy credits, right? Like, where would we be today if there was an hourly matching requirement? Because in the early days of solar, you could decouple the credit and you could sell the credit independent from the REC, and it didn't have to be time matched. And the thing that I think we have to remember that hydrogen and clean hydrogen is the foundation and essential to really diversifying away from fossil fuels. And whether we're talking about using hydrogen directly in a bus or using it to make sustainable aviation fuel or methanol or shipping fuels or ammonia or fertilizer, we have to have it at scale. We have to have it be clean. And unless you achieve scale quickly, it just pushes that future further away from us. And the default is fossil fuels. So I agree with everything they said. And to get to your other point, Todd, yes, it has shown up in our bill.
Okay.
And so, I think it's pretty clear where we stand on that. And I would say 45V certainly influenced the implementation of Senate Bill 1350. And I think it was more about policymakers desiring to have guardrails, right? Like, but they also did it in a way that provided flexibility to the CEC and how they implement it. And, for example, it's not required until 2030, and it's not specifically 45V matching. So it doesn't specify that you need to have an hourly EAC, right? You could, and we think that flexibility is necessary, and we shall see how it goes. It hasn't been implemented yet. We just got it signed into law on June 29th, like literally, about 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Don, did you have anything to add before we sort of move on to something else or a reaction to what Janice and Chris were
I
saying
thought
about?
what you just said was really poignant. It was on point. I think if I had to summarize it, we let perfect be the enemy of the good in the context of the three pillars. The goal of the policy was to scale this technology because it is essential for economy. Hydrogen as a molecule is essential for economy-wide decarbonization. So it was letting perfect be the enemy of the good was our shortcoming here, I think. But I think both Chris and Janice summarized it really nicely.
Okay. That's great. Thank you all. I want to sort of talk about, another dynamic that's sort of changed dramatically is the explosion of electricity demand from data centers and AI and other large loads. I wonder sort of how does increasing competition for renewable power and grid interconnection affect the outlook for electrolytic hydrogen projects? Maybe Chris, I'll ask you to start first.
Yeah, I can't believe we got 45 minutes of no webinar before saying the word data center.
That's my fault as a moderator. Should have said data center right up front.
Yeah,
I mentioned it in my opening remarks.
Okay.
I'm sorry. She saw where we were going. It's very large impacts, and I think even growing, and I think we're still growing an appreciation of it. So if I put on my frontline developer hat, kind of see it in three places maybe. the first one you run into is when you file for grid interconnection, and either the local utility says you're in line behind, 4 or 40 gigawatts of data center requests, and it's going to be 7 years before I can build out and serve you, or more and more you're seeing market reforms where they're trying to avoid those outcomes, but some of the ways they're doing it is setting some very large barriers to entry. Like, okay, you want to apply for that amount of megawatt capacity, post $20 million with your requests to prove that you're real. And for long duration, big capital projects, that can be difficult. The second place we run into it is sourcing the hourly matching renewables we were talking about earlier, which in most of the projects we look at does really require some new build wind, where there's not a whole lot of new build wind happening, and there are a fair number of hyperscalers that have some of the same time matching, ambitions for their own internal programs, and so all of a sudden you got intense demand for that renewable energy, particularly the wind product. And maybe the third whammy is great. You find a wind farm that's got capacity that meets what you need. On the one hand, you got a hyperscaler that says, "Hey, I'll put down those tens of millions deposit today." To lock up that capacity because I'm very positive, very sure of my business plans, versus again a long cycle development project where it's hard. I don't need that power till 4 or 5 years from now, and I'm not even going to FID till a year or two from now. How do I compete with that hyperscaler ready to act today to lock down that power? So those are two really big challenges. And third thing I'll say we're seeing is actually, I guess in the public domain, Plug has done this, but we're seeing hydrogen projects that have capacity, and data centers come and say, "Hey, why don't you skip the hydrogen and sell the site to us?" And that's a hard thing to turn down. So that's maybe some headwinds to the industry on projects that otherwise could have been hydrogen projects, but it's it's a offer too good to refuse to convert the site. So a lot of impacts.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Uh, so I'm sensitive to time. I want to leave some time at the end for questions here, but I do want to sort of talk about future, what Don and you and I were talking earlier about, sort of future bites at the apple, for hydrogen policy that you see coming, whether state or federal. What are the sort of the most important? You talked already about sort of not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. Most important lessons for policymakers should take away from that experience with 45V. Are there, examples of policies that are working well today? We talked a little bit about what's happening in Europe with the carrot and the stick, but anything else in terms of future bites of the apple that you see coming, and things that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There will be another wave for a policy push in the hydrogen space because hydrogen is a necessary component of economy-wide decarbonization. That will have to happen. It needs to be holistic, and it needs to incentivize both the generation and the offtake and the transport. I hope we can learn some lessons from the 2021 to 2023 push. I would say, looking at the United States in the actual universe of the way our policies are, the types of policies we tend to have, the investment tax credit for fuel cells is a great example of something that works. And this is really Don Boyajian speaking for myself, maybe not for industry or Plug, but I always thought that having an incentive for the domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers would be a great incentive to have. It's more discreet. People need, when people are building projects and financing projects and making investment decisions, they need something that is predictable and can be underwritten, and they know what they're getting into. And something like the IT investment tax credit for fuel cells affords that type of certainty. And if there was something like that for electrolyzers, I think it could be neat and clean and maybe drive that business and maybe hydrogen generation projects domestically, that maybe in a way that 45V has fallen short because it's such a so complicated.
Yeah.
So
Janice, from your perspective, post SB 1350, what are you working on? What do you see in terms of future, bites of the apple and priorities for hydrogen policy coming?
So I agree that this is the way the world is headed, right? Like this push must happen. And I think what it will take and what we're working on is educating our policymakers, both at the state, the regional, and the local level, that we have a lot of stress today. We have an affordability, we got an energy security, energy availability, price volatility. The answer to all of this and to clean the air, decarbonize, and create thousands of family sustaining jobs is to intentionally focus on creating an economy that's founded on producing hydrogen and the fuels that we need. And when we can do that and satisfy our own need, it opens the door to potentially exporting this abundant resource in the form of molecules, methanol, ammonia, to Japan, Singapore, South Korea, Germany, Europe, other countries. I mean, that sounds like that's where the projects are going now. But we haven't intentionally focused on this as a strategic move to enhance our energy security and also create jobs, right? Like, and these are high paying, valuable jobs. There's a shovel ready green hydrogen project in Southern California. I think that one project alone is something like more than 1,200 jobs. And imagine the kind of job creation that we can create to backfill sort of the departing oil and gas industry if we were to make methanol, sustainable aviation fuel, and ammonia. And if we made it locally and satisfied local demand, then we would be shielding our farmers against price volatility for fertilizer. And that affects everybody in their pocketbook because we all eat food, right? Things that we grow here. So I think in terms of the future and where there's opportunity, it's in reshaping the lens and the narrative about how we talk about hydrogen and its usefulness and its strategic value to our entire economy and the amazing products that it can be, used to produce.
Great. Okay. So closing thoughts here for you all. If I want, if there's a takeaway for our audience that you'd like to articulate, or if you're imagining that we're sitting here again, 5 years from now, what do you expect that we'll be saying about renewable powered electrolytic hydrogen? What has to happen between now and then? I'll start with you, Don. Go ahead.
oh gosh, I got to start.
That's too much, maybe. How about just closing thoughts and takeaways, and where you hope we'll be in 5 years, 10 years from now?
I hope that there will be another policy push that is cognizant of how hard it is to scale a new energy technology that provides a suite of policies that are cognizant of that complexity, are cognizant of the providing those glide paths to scaling, and don't let perfect be the enemy of the good in that next wave.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, couple of thoughts. One I'll start with is it's incumbent on us as technologists and project developers to keep improving the economics and keep driving the cost down. The costs are still higher than where they need to be a long-term sustainable industry. So I know folks like Plug and us are working on that, but you also need volume, right? You need projects happening to foster that and make the virtuous cycle. Number two, on policy, I've always got mixed feelings about we need better policies or we need policy stability, because those are a little bit at odds, right? If you want better policy, you're reopening the basket and reframing things. And I spend a lot of time with the downstream customers who are ultimately making the buying decisions underpinning these projects. And it's always an easy excuse for delay from them if they say, "Hey, I think there's some better changes coming next year, and I'm just going to hold off, and I think there's a better time for me to buy next year," and that kind of keeps our pipelines not moving as fast as we'd like and not delivering on what we mentioned. One bud, and I swear this is not a plug for CRS here, but I love that there's continued work around book and claim concepts around things like clean ammonia and clean jet fuel. Maybe to part of Janice's comment earlier, it's kind of crazy that we make jet fuel in Illinois and we've got to put it on a boat and send it all the way to Germany to put it on a plane to fly back to the US to, to meet that mandate. That's not a carbon sensibly thing to do. So I love that it's super early days. There's not a lot of commercial activity yet, and maybe even a little bit of backwards sliding on the commercial commitment over the last year, but there's a real commitment by a lot of great groups that are, defining those attributes, the characteristics around them so that corporate buyers can trust in those. And I'm hopeful that's a part of the picture to bolster kind of the mandate side of things.
Fantastic. Thanks. And Janice, I'll give you the last word here.
I'm just going to assume that policy instability is the new normal. Where I'd like to see us go in the next 5 years is radical collaboration in a very hyper-regional and place-based way, so we can discuss multi-sectoral synergies, and I'll call it system innovation, right? Like coupling different types of production so the outputs of one become the benefits and a valuable input to another. Co-locating so we can build shared infrastructure with new demand, right? Like I've been harping on, we should be making fertilizer and ammonia right here in California. I mean, holy cow, we import tons of it from Trinidad. Why aren't we making that right here? And that should be coupled with scaled, clean, and renewable hydrogen production that is combined so we can afford the very short pipeline that's going to connect the two, and maybe some storage buffer to ensure resource supply availability. I think there's system innovation that's possible in how we structure and finance this shared infrastructure with these projects. And there's a lot of examples in Europe on how this is being done, where instead of financing a project with really expensive private equity, let's integrate the off-taker. Let's bring municipalities in there who have a much lower cost of capital. And above all, I'd like to see in 5 years a leadership vision that creates alignment regionally. In our case, we're in California. I'd like to see a vision that is aligned at the state level, at the county level, and at the local level, that filtrates down to the sectors that are affected. Because progress relies on concurrent building of scaled supply and demand. And we got to start somewhere. So it's probably a successful regional mini hub. We'll have lots of lessons learned, and in 5 years, we'll be looking at how to replicate it. That's my idea.
Thank you. That's perfect. So I'm looking at the questions that have come in here, and we don't have we haven't gotten many, but that's okay because we're running short of time. We've addressed a few about sort of what's being done in the U.S. to encourage hydrogen from non-conventional sources. There were a couple of questions that came in about using desalinated water for green hydrogen production. Is that economically viable? And then what about the green hydrogen transport challenges? Is there either any of you want to address those quickly?
I'll go ahead. I'll address the Janice. I'll take the desalination piece, and I'll let you handle the transport side, maybe. Electrolyzers fundamentally need ultra pure water, and so at least I know our design and most of the mainstream ones. Maybe there's some technology down the road that could take seawater directly, but as we think about it, you have to get to ultra pure water. But that being said, in the grand scheme of the cost of these projects, if that's the best water source available, you can do desalination, and it's not moving the needle radically on the cost of the project. So we see projects where people are planning desalination, still getting to that pure water state for the electrolyzer, but doing that is just part of their project infrastructure.
Okay.
And I love how, because it's a small part of the cost structure, advancing electrolysis can help cities advance water recycling programs, many of whom and Don, your company is famous for doing that for the city of Mendota. Um, so the thing I
Every-
wanted to say about pipelines really quick is most people don't realize that hydrogen is like a super mature commodity. We have thousands of miles of hydrogen pipeline in commercial operation right now here in this country, including in Los Angeles and the Gulf Coast. So it is entirely doable. It's just a question. You wouldn't build a pipeline to move a couple truckloads. You need like a lot of truckloads. But then once you have enough production and demand, the cost of moving the hydrogen in a pipeline is like a factor of 10 cheaper than moving it on a truck. And that is the barrier that we have to overcome. And that's why we have to look at the solution as an ecosystem and focus in a very tight regional location.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Don and Janice and Chris again for sharing their insights and experience and time. And I want to just remind everyone that this year's Renewable Energy Markets Conference will be in Washington, D.C. from September 1st through the 3rd. That's a little less than a month away. The agenda is posted. The registration is open. You can find more information and register for that event now at renewableenergymarkets.com. It's going to be a fantastic event. We look forward to seeing you there, and also keep an eye on the CRS events page for future webinars and other events at resource-solutions.org/events. Thank you all again today for joining us, and take care. Thank you.